Hello again, folks. KR King of D&D Homebrew here with a special episode of my channel. This is part of a discussion that I hosted for the DM Roundtable group. The topic was inspiration. How do GMs stay inspired? Where do they draw their inspiration for storylines and encounters? And how do they avoid burnout? This was the first section of that, which was how do we find inspiration for storylines and encounters? And I use art, but as a general topic, we've got books, films, video games, music, whatever it is that you take and draw from to create your world. So let's dive right in. So before we start, I'd like each of our DMs to introduce themselves. So we'll start looking here. Fred Wheeler.
Hi, how's it going, Kevin? My name is Fred Wheeler. I run the How to D&D YouTube channel. I talk about Dungeons and Dragons, other RPGs, player stuff, Dungeon Master stuff, and I'm teaching classes on YouTube now. So that's me.
And should we just go around here I will say Jacob. I'll go around my circle here.
Yeah, sure. My name is Jacob Crow. I am running the Crow's Perch YouTube channel where I cover a bunch of D&D stories, horror stories, and other RPG content. Usually it's mostly just narration and that kind of stuff, but I'll throw my 2 cents in whenever it comes to design or just, social interactions and things like that in the space.
Great. Eric?
Hi, I'm Eric of the Geek Pantheon YouTube channel. I produce videos, book reviews when D&D releases new books, as well as adventure reviews and other DM advice videos, gaining inspiration from various places, how to build encounters, things like that.
Okay, and Key?
All right, hopefully this thing comes out fine, but yep. Hello, everybody. My name is Sunsei Suplex. I am a professional dungeon master who goes about all the entire D&D sphere, basically making wonderful games for you guys to all enjoy, as well as figuring out ways to help enhance your games and bring them to that of the next level.
All right, great. And so the first question that we have is inspired by art. That is, tell us about some, whether it's a film, a book, it could be a comic book, maybe even a work of art that has inspired you in terms of, creating a homebrewed scenario or thinking about how you run your game, or even the mood of, whether it's a one shot or a whole campaign that's inspired by art. So we'll go to Sunsei Suplex to start with, and tell us some work of art that has inspired you.
So, a work of art that's inspired me, not necessarily a piece of specific art or any bit of a art painting or art piece or anything like that, but I believe these still are a form of art in any way, shape, or form. And that being, video games. A lot of the things that I do, a lot of the inspiration that I get is from video games because a lot of my players, they play video games. So I think one of the most recent and brief inspirations, and funny enough, I didn't even really play it for that long, was actually For Honor. The reason why For Honor, this game basically where there are 3 major kingdoms, there are the Vikings, there are the medieval knights and Templars, and also even the samurai, they're all battling in this massive sort of world for pretty much domination and control over the lands. Now, despite me not even playing too much of the game, I got inspired by that sort of concept of a world because oftentimes when you DM for long periods of times, long campaigns and more, you can feel burnt out, you can feel tired of the same setting and you want to switch and change. But having this sort of, or going about an approach where there are multiple regions of varying and vastly different sort of societies and more, having that bit of sort of freedom and flexibility to be I'm really tired of, playing in a sort of samurai setting, let's go and play as Vikings and more. Or I'm tired of sort of doing Vikings, maybe I'm going to go do more of a deserty-esque campaign. But having those sort of 3 different societies and all that stuff sort of battling out, and at least basing a world around that has been extensively helpful in not getting too tired or too bored of things. And also keeps things fresh for players, especially.
Well, this is exactly what I was thinking about in terms of this question, because you're going into this other world. And again, these different cultures, you say, let's do a Viking thing. They had a very distinctive worldview, whether or not we really know how accurate it is, or movies or video games. But yeah, it shakes things up, right? It's different if you get stale, or if you're always running the same sort of medieval cliched D&D world. That's where something like that, a video game, could just inspire you, I think.
Exactly.
Okay, let's go with Eric.
Yeah, probably the biggest point of inspiration that I have going right now. I am a very avid reader. I love like sitting down with a good book or a good series and just powering through them. And I started a series this year and just never stopped until I got caught up, which is the Dresden Files. And, you know, there's 17 books that have been released thus far in the series, and just going down that rabbit hole. And something that I found extremely compelling about that book series, and something that has really informed the way that I world build and introduce NPCs, is for those of you who don't know, it's modern fantasy. It's set in modern day Chicago, but vampires are real, the Fae are real, all these things are actually here, and you follow the main character, who is a wizard. But the way that Jim Butcher, the author, utilizes Fae or vampires and stays true to the mythological sources where these types of characters come from, but finds interesting and compelling ways to make them engaging and unique, and you can really empathize with somebody that you know is at their core evil. Like vampires want to eat people. That's how they breathe. But you still empathize and find them compelling and find them interesting. And how, as a dungeon master, can I introduce my monsters and NPCs in such a way to where my players can go on that same journey of like, I know I should hate you. I know I should hate you, but I don't, and that bothers me. So I love that book series for that reason, as well as a multitude of others.
Well, isn't it interesting how, when we're trying to make well-rounded villains, it's something like literature, something where they do go into something like a vampire, something like an evil. And the best villains, of course, in literature are well-rounded, right? And we understand, the flaw of a villain are their good aspects or whatever. His sister, he would have had a weakness for, right? And so that makes them interesting. Or the vampire thing where the eternal life is so boring. And this is exactly, what I would encourage people out there: read some book or play a video game that's in a different world, because it gives you that perspective, which I think is so important. Okay, let's go to Jacob. What has been art, whether it's anything, novel, graphic novel, whatever it is, what has inspired you in terms of your game?
For me, video games are obviously a big inspiration. I love playing video games, but also music. I feel like music is something that always, like, for not just encounter design, like the question presented here, but just also like setting information, things like that too. I listen to a lot of like ambient tracks, like right now in my own Blades in the Dark campaign. A lot of the mood and vibe I've kind of gotten from like Trent Reznor and his music, which is very much on like the kind of like dark, kind of gothic kind of vibe here. And I feel like that kind of like it really helps me kind of piece it together myself when it comes to like ambient tracks in particular, because there's no words to it. I kind of have to associate my own feelings, my own words into what exactly I'm kind of experiencing through this. I blame my brother. He listens to a lot of stuff like this, like what is it, like Atrium Carceri and things like that, towards all just like different ambient kind of tones, like dark ambient jazz, like other you'd be surprised the kind of stuff that exists out there. It's it's wild, but it's like it kind of helps you piece together a mood and a vibe to which to build something off from. And I don't know, I find it very inspiring.
Oh, I'm so glad. Like, I wondered, because I didn't pick music, although for this, but music does inspire me, when you're creating whatever. And, I played on some online games where some people do it badly. They put that background music, but we did this battle scene.
Video game soundtracks are also really good for D&D fights. I don't know what the fuck, like old. I don't know what the hell people were doing before when they were playing a bunch of like stock 2004, like medieval fantasy fighting music, because like video game music for fantasy battles just blows that out of the water. It is just incredible the kind of stuff you hear nowadays, to where they'll have like actual like orchestras and stuff. Like I'll use music from games like Destiny, and it's like they have an actual like orchestra for like the soundtrack for games like that, and it's like it's just incredible. And it's like I'm getting goosebumps running it, and like even if the battle's not that interesting, it's like the music makes it interesting, you know?
Well, and like I said, we were about to assault this castle, and he had special mass combat rules that he had developed. But as we started, he put on these bagpipe music, like the guys marching in, and like the Scottish pipe. And we all were just like going, here we go, and blast, because they had the ballistas up top and everything. And totally, and I mean, it was, we were all kind of laughing because it was both ridiculous and super fun. So that is, music is fantastic. Okay, so Fred, tell me about something that has inspired you, art of some kind.
Well, I decided to pick a Dungeons and Dragons meme, which is, it's got a bit of text and it's got an image. And this meme was basically around including monster mounts in a Dungeons and Dragons game and basically trying to take the piss out of it. And the image is actually of a undead blind beholder being used as a mount by a mind flayer. And so I took that meme and turned it into a boss or a villain, and I called them Master Blaster. So the mind flayer on top, I decided was Master. He was the brains. That was the mind flayer, and Blaster was the beholder underneath, who was the sort of the beholder zombie, also blind, but you can still be blind and shoot people with rays. Okay, they just might not hit quite as accurately as you would have liked. So it was complicated. It was complicated. I was not like I made every single eye blind, just the central one. So I actually included this into a campaign in Undermountain for Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which I know Kevin knows quite a lot about. He's been doing a lot of videos on. And it wasn't just a combination of that meme, seeing that meme, because there's an old movie, Mad Max Beyond the Thunderdome, and there's a character in there called Master Blaster. And the first thing that came to my mind was the big hulking guy and the tiny little guy sitting on top. And I was like, how do you do that in Dungeons and Dragons? And when I saw the beholder and the mind flayer, I was like, that's exactly it. If you were going to take that concept from Mad Max and poured it into Dungeons and Dragons, that's how you would do it. I have to say my players were shocked. Surprisingly, they did figure out how I'd got to this point. They seem to have either seen the meme or remembered Mad Max. And yeah, so it worked out really well, and I'm glad that I did it. And I would probably do it again. There's plenty of memes out there that need exploiting.
It's great because I had not expected it. A meme that's sort of making a funny joke or whatever those guys, and then you think, hey, wait a second. And then that connection to the Mad Max thing, that's great. So for me, and all of these things are, in terms of all this, what you said are inspirations. One of the things lately that I've been inspired by are the spaghetti westerns of Sergio Leone. I watched some of these and I realized that the universe he builds is, because I like to run frontier continents where you're in a remote area, there's not much magic, you're far away, the settlements are very isolated and always under danger of being overrun. And he also has this outsider's perspective of the Old West, where a lot of the myths about, whatever it is, the settling of the West, or all the Westerns that were produced, he had this European sensibility. They're very cynical. They're very, his attitudes about the Civil War and everything, has these bounty hunters where the Civil War is just background for them, right? They're out to get stuff. They're just out to score, the bandits and the good guys. And I just found that fascinating. The other element about Sergio Leone is it's a true postmodern, these are postmodern films done in the 60s, which is why they've been so influential on people even to this day, where if it doesn't happen on camera, it doesn't exist. There's a famous scene in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly where Tuco and Blondie are walking along with their map, and they on this road, and they say, we're going to go to the cemetery. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere come these Union guards. They arrest them. And without moving the camera just goes like this. And we look over here behind a tree, and there's a giant valley with a huge battle going on with thousands of troops. We would have heard this. They would have heard this miles away. And they asked Leone, and he said, if it's not on camera, it's not there. And there's an element of D&D. You're in a world with raised deads and cure diseases where how would this affect society with people getting raised and cured? And it's like, you know what? It's a game. If it's not on camera, it doesn't exist. And I just think about that in terms of my own world. And I think about that that's how you can get through some of those complexities. So now I'm going to open it up a little bit. Does anyone, in terms of our discussion or anything, have anything else that they've thought of while we were talking? I'll just let anybody comment that wants to here.
I actually did have something I did want to add on to kind of what I was mentioning before. It was, I started thinking a little bit more about it when, Jacob, you mentioned your stuff when it came to video games and more getting inspiration from that, as well as also a bit of music. So one thing that I thought of was, I also get inspired by what my players get inspired by. Now, what that means is I'll often ask, like, hey, players, what do you guys like? What do you guys enjoy? What type of music? What type of games? What type of books? Any of that sort of stuff. And the reason why I ask that is because sometimes they'll implement the things that they really enjoy into their characters. And they'll often want to see sometimes, whether they are direct about it or indirect, they'll kind of want to see that played out in D&D. For example, if, I don't know, I'm just going to, oh, good.
I was just thinking, like, it's kind of interesting because, like, I see that happen quite a few times where, like, a player will be like, oh, this is kind of the theme song I was thinking of when it comes to, like, my character. And then I'll try to be like, like, I'll try to see if I can find a way to fit this in here somewhere. Like, maybe if you're having, like, a badass moment, we just play your theme or whatever.
Yeah. It could be as simple as that, like just playing a song or whatever in the background. It will get the players, or at least that player, definitely engaged in everything. So the point is just asking your player, like, hey, what do you kind of enjoy, and then figuring out ways to implement it. Somebody could be like, oh, I really love Spider-Man, and they built a character that kind of wants to swing around with ropes and whips and all that sort of stuff. So maybe you implement a scene or an encounter where they can kind of do that and feel like Spider-Man. But ask your players what inspires them so you can get inspired and put it into the game.
Well, and jumping off of that thought, I think, like, if I have a player that clearly has made a Miles Morales or a Peter Parker, like their version of that, and Spider-Man is a big point of inspiration for them, how engaged and excited is that player going to be the second you introduce the Green Goblin as a villain in the campaign? Like, or a black symbiote, like a black ooze that's crawling around and stuff. Like, you're going to get instant buy-in from that player because you're clearly listening and understanding what they're wanting to do with their character, and rewarding that and engaging with them on that. So yeah, knowing what inspires your players can inform how you design things to make sure that they're even more bought in and excited about what you're doing.
100%.
Go ahead, Fred. Did you have something?
Yeah, I was really interested by, Eric, your mention of the Dressender files, because there is a Fate game based on that did very well. And it's probably one of the most interesting aspects of a role-play game where you take elements of the real world and you integrate them with fantastical ideas as if they were normally there, which is what we always want to try to do in some respect when you're dealing with a movie and like, okay, can you convince people that there are actually vampires in this world? And I think this is sort of a good example of that. I think that's probably, I had heard it was based off other literature, but I like the idea that they have managed to take an aspect of our own world and integrate it in such a way, which kind of sort of begs the question that when we take art, whether it be a still image or it's a depiction in a movie or something like that, I mean, how interesting is it for the players to, say, run through a world where it's like right now, they know this world right now, like this, it's 2022, they're in wherever they live, on planet Earth, but things aren't quite the same in this game. There are other things going on. I really like the idea of how that can sort of affect things. It's an interesting concept. I think it buys in a player probably more, or potentially puts them off more, which who knows which one it's going to go with. But I still like the idea.
I really like the idea of asking your players what inspires them. What do you think of with your player? And it's like in the movie business when you write something and they always say, who do you envision in the lead role? And they do that because they want to see what you're thinking, because that'll instantly connect with them, the producer type or whatever. And you're asking your players, again, what music do you see with this character? How do you envision it? Because you're always trying to, what we've talked about, get the players to be excited, buy in and feel like they're part of this process.
To
All right.
piggyback
Anyone
off
else?
that, that's kind of funny
Mhm.
that I play with a lot of people who really love movies. And so sometimes when I have like an NPC or, other characters' descriptions, if I feel like my own descriptions are failing me, I'll say things like, "Oh, this guy, he kind of looks like Denzel Washington, but with like this kind of hair," or like he kind of looks like Matt Damon, but with like this kind of beard or whatever. Like they'll just imagine that, and then it makes me want to do like a shitty impression of them or whatever. Like, but it's interesting to me to help with the buy-in too, because it's like not only do you get to them to kind of see more about like what's going on, but it kind of helps them see it from that perspective of like, this is something that's familiar to me. It's like I feel like I could see the movie of this now, you know?
Well, and I would say I think it can be very much a two-way street when like not only ask your players what their inspiration for their character elements or their backstory are, but I as a DM am never afraid to share my points of inspiration. And like I'm planning a campaign right now, and I was very open with their players of telling them we're thinking like very like Men in Black / BPRD from Hellboy, like you all are supernatural cops that are, and by giving that direct reference rather than just saying supernatural cops, because that can evoke a lot of different things, by saying Men in Black BPRD, that gives them they're in the same headspace as me. So when they're coming up with their characters' backstories or their character types, you're gonna potentially have less friction when your inspiration comes up against theirs, because they're gonna understand where you're coming from the outset as well.
Also, to piggyback on top of that, a lot of the time when you even mention like, oh yeah, this world is sort of inspired by this sort of thing, or this is the campaign that's kind of inspired on this. Oftentimes, you'll have players that are like, oh my gosh, I love Men in Black. I can't wait for this. They'll get them even more excited on top of that. So definitely I agree with it being a two-way street.
So there you have it, a very interesting discussion. Thanks again to all the panelists. Also, next weekend, I will be in Indianapolis at Gen Con. I'm really looking forward to that. If you're going to be there, look me up, shoot me an email or something. We'll figure out a way to meet up. I'm going to be playing in games and tournaments and whatnot, just checking out the scene. So I hope to see you there. Also, I'll be reporting from Gen Con, possibly doing some live streaming. I'm really looking forward to that. And of course, if you like the content on my channel, please subscribe. I'm always looking for more. Leave some comments because I love to read them and respond. But most importantly, keep playing D&D and tell somebody else about it.